and 25. We're going to try to accomplish three things today. First of all, we're going to work House Bill 2327, and then we will have hearings on House Bill 2325 and 2329. We'll turn first to House Bill number 2327, which is the certificate of employability to be given to certain inmates. And I'd ask the revisor to tell us about that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office. And as you said, this is the bill that relates to the Secretary issuing a certificate of employability to certain inmates and what happens once they have that certificate as far as evidentiary value, hiring value, et cetera.
Do we have a motion on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee pass out House Bill 2327 favorably for passage.
Have a second? Representative James. I have an amendment to the bill, which I'd ask the revisor to pass out to people. So to explain the amendment, what this bill does is it requires that the Department of Correction provide something called a certificate of employability to certain inmates which qualify for that. And the purpose of these certificates is to help them get jobs when they are released from custody. And one of the other provisions in it, in order to encourage employers to employ these folks, is to, it says that the certificate can be used, currently the bill unamended says that it can be used as a defense to a civil claim for negligent hiring. And I have the amendment would eliminate that defense, but would still preserve the right of the employer to use the certificate as evidence that they use due diligence in their hiring. So that's the amendment. It's open for discussion. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I commend the chair on this excellent amendment, and I appreciate your work in that regard and taking into account my input as well as that of others. It is a good idea. The bill, as originally drafted, would perhaps provided a full defense or a partial defense in a negligent hiring claim, when in fact there may have been other events that would be very relevant, but the certificate of employability would trump, pardon the use of the word of the President's name in vain, would trump those other causes of action. One other observation, since we sometimes make legislative intent here, particularly when we are now recorded and the court sometimes cites to what we say in hearings, I do appreciate the use of the word may as opposed to shall, meaning that it is likely to be permissive, because there could be circumstances where the certificate was of no relevancy to an issue or inadmissible for some other purpose, and I think it was very appropriate to reserve judicial discretion, but with the legislature's strong nudge that these ought to be admitted in most cases, certainly.
Thank you for that. And yes, Representative Carmichael was very instrumental in noticing the problem and bringing it to our attention. And so I appreciate that. And I agree, as the bill provides, that it doesn't mandate that judges allow this certificate as evidence, but it certainly suggests to them that they think about that, which I think is appropriate. I'm generally in favor of judicial discretion in most matters. Sure.
And I might also add, a court's failure to admit such evidence in circumstances where it was relevant and material might well constitute reversible error. So I think we're protected on many counts.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any more discussion on the amendment proposed? If not, I think we did that represent. Well, that was. Oh, actually, we did not have a second on my amendment. So, Representative Carmichael. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, any more discussion? If not, I close. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Or yeah, nay. The amendment passes. Do we want to record votes? No? Okay. All right. We're back on the bill now. We're open for discussion. Representative Smith.
Just asking, does the certificate have on it Department of Corrections, so the person that's hiring them knows where this is coming from? Just asking. I'm not trying to work against it or anything.
Well, the bill says in section 1, the secretary shall issue a certificate of employability if the inmate is qualified and as set forth. So I'm pretty confident the secretary on that certificate would indicate that it's coming from the secretary. Representative Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is actually for you. Will there be a standardized process to get the certificate so we can eliminate bias and things along those lines, or is it going to be subjective from site to site?
I think we're leaving the details in that respect up to the secretary and the people who work in the area.
So it's left up into the interpretation of the person who is providing the certificate. Will there be any, so there won't be any kind of minimums or thresholds? Because my worry is that someone comes out of jail or prison, because this is a prison situation, I'm guessing. Someone comes out of prison and they have from site to site, because there's no standardization, someone can come out of a prison where they do get the certificate, and then someone can come from a prison where they don't get the certificate, because that's kind of the standard practice for the warden or whoever's the person who is providing the certificate. And so my worry is that that's going to cause some people to seem unemployable because there is no standardization. So that's why I'm asking the question about a standardization to be able to get their certificate.
Well, the bill sets forth the circumstances under which the secretary shall issue the certificate. For instance, the inmate has earned a high school diploma, general education development credentials. Another one, inmate received no major disciplinary violations. So we're setting forth the objective criteria pursuant to which the secretary would be required to issue the certificate. So there are some objective standards, and it will be, the secretary has jurisdiction over all of the correctional institutions in the state, so you would expect that there would be some standardization there. Representative Carmichael.
In further response to my colleague Representative Mosley's inquiry, this appears to me to be pretty strong statutory language. This repeatedly says the secretary shall, and I don't know that you could make it any more specific. And if the secretary controls all the institutions, and so I don't know you could write a better statute than this, and I certainly think it's appropriate under the circumstances.
Any further discussion? Okay, we're ready to go to a vote. All those in favor? I'm sorry, sir. Let me back up here. Okay, we need a motion. We need a motion to pass as amended. Would you want to make that?
I move that we pass out House Bill 2327 as amended favorably for action. Is that right? Favorably.
Yeah. Representative Ressman seconds the motion. We're ready to vote on the motion. Cindy? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Howerton, did you? No. Okay, all right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The bill as amended passes. We want Representative Carmichael and Schlingen-Siepen and Mosley want their affirmative votes recorded, and they may be so. All right. So we're now going to turn to hearings on two bills. The first bill to be heard is House Bill 2325. And I'm going to ask Revisor Jason Thompson to run us through this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, Jason Thompson, Office of Revisor of Statutes. You have the brief for this one. It's a couple pages, so I'll try not to take too much of your time and let you get to the conferees here. This is the bill that authorizes judges to commit juvenile offenders to detention for technical violations of probation. It also increases the cumulative detention limit, and it increases certain criminal penalties for offenders who use a firearm in the commission of an offense or who are repeat offenders. Section 1 gets into KSA 38-2361. These are all in the Juvenile Offender Code, by the way, as noted in the bill brief. This is the sentencing alternatives for juveniles. The current law I referenced there in subsection A13 is the rule for firearms, and there is essentially the court may commit a juvenile directly to the Secretary of Corrections custody if they make a finding that a firearm was used in the commission of an offense which, if committed by an adult, would constitute a felony. So you commit an offense that would be a felony and use a firearm, then you get this special sentencing provision, regardless of the risk level of the juvenile. The bill takes this alternative and makes it applicable if a firearm was possessed or used, so not just used, but also now possessed, during the commission of a felony offense. It also increases the maximum term that you can have when under this provision from 6 months to 12 months on the lower end and from 18 months to 36 months on the maximum end. Then Section 2 gets into 38-2369. That is the requirements for placing a juvenile in the juvenile correctional facility. The current law defines several categories of offenders. The one at issue here is the category of chronic offenders. Those offenders are allowed to be committed to a JCF, a juvenile correctional facility, only if they're assessed as high risk on their risk needs assessment. But the bill would remove that assessment requirement. So these offenders would be able to be placed essentially regardless of risk assessment of being high risk. Offenders in this category, I note, under current law, and it's not changed, could be committed to the JCF for a minimum of 6 months and a maximum of 12 months. So all that's really changing there is the assessment part, not the sentence itself. Section 3 then gets into 38-2391. That's the overall case length limit under the Juvenile Offender Code. There's a cumulative detention limit of 45 days over the course of the juvenile's case, and the bill increases that to 90 days. So that's the change there. Section 4 is 38-2392. This is the community-based graduated responses for technical violations of probation, conditional release, et cetera. The current law allows the judge to commit a juvenile offender to detention for violations of probation. The addition in the bill is to include specifically technical violations so that they could be sent to detention for those violations. I note that under current law and unchanged in the bill, that can be 24 hours for a first violation, 48 hours for a second, and 15 days for a third or subsequent violation. So that's Section 4. And finally, Section 5 is KSA 75-7023. That is the Juvenile Intake and Assessment System. There's a specific provision in current law about the detention risk assessment tool and the override function in order to commit a juvenile to detention for direct placement in a short-term facility, a community-based alternative, or detention, that sort of thing. The bill adds that the court shall approve an override function of the detention risk assessment tool when a juvenile is alleged to have possessed or used a firearm during the commission of an offense. And in that instance, the juvenile intake assessment folks and the court shall override the assessment tool score to order direct placement in detention. So right now, essentially, you have to be assessed and meet certain criteria to go to detention, but if you use or possess a firearm, that will automatically be overridden and you will be placed in detention under this section. Hopefully that's clear. A few moving parts here, and I'll be happy to answer questions if I can.
Any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, we'll move on to the hearing proponents. I'm showing Sheriff Easter on WebEx.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Sheriff. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
There, and I do see you actually on now. I do. So welcome to the committee, and let us know your thoughts on the bill.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Lewis and committee members, I appreciate you giving me the time to speak to you today. I am representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association today. 3 points of this bill. First, adding the term possessed other than just use of a firearm, we believe is something that should be supported. In our experience in law enforcement, the simply possessing and using a firearm is minuscule. Whether it's juveniles or whether it's adults, if you're possessing that firearm to do another crime that's a felony, it is the linkage between just possessing it and using it is a matter of seconds. And so we support the information of adding possessed into the current language. We also support the current law only allows for minimum sentencing for using a firearm to 6 months to a maximum of 18 months. We support this bill adding that it would be a minimum of 12 months and maximum of 36 months. In our area down here in Sedgwick County, we have seen juvenile crime rise. And we've seen it since the passage of Senate Bill 367. Now, 90% of the juveniles that we deal with, Senate Bill 367 has absolutely, we believe, helped those kids and stay out of the criminal justice system. The problem is the 10% that are constantly involved in the criminal justice system. We have very little tools, and judges have very little tools to hold them accountable. These are two things that when you possess a firearm and committing a what would be a crime for an adult as a felony, we believe those juveniles should be held just as accountable. We would also argue that a chronic offender, which we've had several, should include a juvenile who commits a felony crime while awaiting adjudication for another felony crime or while on probation for a felony crime. Those are some of the problems that we're having here locally as well. A couple years ago, after the Senate bill passed, there was 12 juveniles that were charged with the crime of murder. And that was very high for this community. I don't know if it coincides with that particular bill passing, but I know some of these kids had other law enforcement contact prior to the murder that our hands were tied on exactly what we could do with them. So this is just carving out a piece of the pie for these kids that we deal with on a regular basis. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
I think we'll take questions of the proponents at the end of the proponent testimony. Thank you. So we'll be back to you if you could be available, Sheriff.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Next on my list is Stephen Howe, Johnson County Attorney with the Kansas 10th Judicial District, on WebEx as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak with you about House Bill 2325. I would indicate that addressing the issues regarding firearms, I would echo what Sheriff Easter has already stated. I will say we learned firsthand here in Johnson County the potential impact of juveniles, not only possession of firearm, but possession of firearm inside a school. We had a tragic situation where a law enforcement officer was shot, as well as an assistant principal, because a juvenile possessed a firearm in a school. Unfortunately, in Kansas right now, the mere possession of that firearm is a misdemeanor. And under the guidelines and our structure of our risk assessments, that individual, it is awful difficult to remand them to detention in those types of situations, even if the gun is not used. I applaud the restructure of this bill, this law, to allow us to hold offenders who put other kids at risk and the community at risk who have a firearm. I would echo what Sheriff Easter said, that we've had a number of juveniles who have committed felony murder in our jurisdiction over the last 10 years. And so it is a real problem. And this gives us opportunities to detain individuals for either possessing or using those firearms. And so I think this is well served to make these changes. The other component is the technical violations, being able to remand individuals. In talking to probation officers and our juvenile diversion staff, so many of these high-risk juveniles basically know that there's little that can be done to them for repeated technical violations. And so this will give the probation officers and the district court the ability for repeat technical violators to be held accountable and have some kind of recourse for their behavior. Is it the first thing that we do is we remand somebody? No, that doesn't make any sense. But the repeat of violators who continue to basically say, you can't order me to do anything because there's no teeth to the law, will be corrected by allowing the courts in the worst case scenarios to allow technical violators to at least spend some shock time in the juvenile correctional facility. Again, it's not the first way that we want to go on these types of violators, but there has to be some teeth in order to get some of these more serious offenders accountable and understand that there is potential repercussions for their behavior. So I think this bill does a lot of really, without making substantial changes, allows us to be able to react appropriately and have more tools in our toolbox for these types of situations. And so I would ask this committee to approve of this bill through your vote. I think this will serve the people of Kansas by protecting them from these worst case scenarios, as well as giving the criminal justice system the ability to basically change behavior. And that's all I have. And I thank you for your time and stand for any questions down the road.
Thank you very much, County Attorney Howe. The next proponent is Ron Paschal, Deputy District Attorney, the Kansas 18th Judicial District. And once again, I believe he is on WebEx. He's not here. Okay. We'll move on and double back and see if he makes an appearance. The next proponent is Matt Stevens, Vice President of St. Francis Ministries. Is he here on WebEx? It was Matt Stevens.
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
So, we're going to try to take Matt Stevens first and then come back to Ron Paschal.
Chair Lewis, Vice Chair Estman, Ranking Member Schliegen-Siepen, and members of the committee. My name is Matt Stevens. I currently serve as Vice President Advocacy for St. Francis Ministries. And for those of you who don't know, St. Francis Ministries operates a continuum of care in the child welfare system here in the state of Kansas. We've been doing this work since 1945. Like my other proponent testimony that you've heard, I would like to commend Kansas. I think we've done a really good job of and made some good strides in juvenile justice reform by reducing the use of detention for low-risk offenders. However, in some of that work, we've really diverted some of our mid-level offenders to the child welfare system. And so that subset, many of those youth have repeat contact with law enforcement and have committed some serious offenses, including crimes involving firearms with little or no meaningful consequences. And so just as an example, we'll have a youth who assaults a worker. That youth then is taken to juvenile intake, and within hours, we're asked to go pick up that youth again, or potentially assaulting their foster care placements. So really trying to figure out what's going to be best for these children as it applies for the safety to not only the system, but also what's best for them. And so it should also be noted that the child welfare system is really about ensuring that those children are safe in their home environments, but they're not necessarily causing the safety issues. And that what we need for children who have conduct disorders is a system that can provide some consistent, clear consequences and structured interventions. And so I really feel like this law definitely does that. And so we would really request that you support the passage of House Bill 2325. And I'm available and welcome to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Next, we'll hear from Ron Paschal, once again, Deputy District Attorney from the Kansas 18th Judicial District.
Probably an age-related to me technology glitch. I don't know if that's the case, but we're here anyhow. I'm assuming because I'm late, we're testifying solely on 2325 right now. Is that correct? Or are we also talking about 2329?
No, we're going to take them in seriatim. So first 2325 and later 2329.
Okay, first 2325. Okay. First of all, thank you to Chairman Lewis for requesting this bill and this committee for hearing it. We are proponents of this particular bill. We view it as kind of a fix to some of the issues that were created by Senate Bill 367 several years ago when we revamped the Juvenile Offender Code. And that was an admirable piece of work focused on community-based supervision and sanctions for juvenile offenders, but it left a couple of things out of the mix. And those two things out of the mix were a group of offenders that, need a greater level of supervision, and also individuals that are using firearms or have firearms during the commission of crimes. Just some statistics. In Sedgwick County in 2023, we had 55 intakes of juvenile offenders on firearms-related offenses. And in 2024, that number jumped to 78 intakes. And so that creates a big community safety issue and problem for us. So we are strong supporters of this particular bill that gives us a little bit more leverage, if you will, to deal with juveniles who elect to use a firearm or have a firearm in their possession during the commission of an offense. And also, a couple of things that are really important in this bill, we think, from a practical matter of community safety and also in preventing a juvenile from harming themselves or perhaps finding herself well on her way to prison is the override function of the detention risk assessment tool for a juvenile that is alleged to have possessed a firearm during the commission of an offense. And that override provision we have states that in such an instance, the juvenile intake and assessment worker or the court shall override the detention risk assessment tool score to order direct placement of in a juvenile detention facility. We think that's very important. We have young people arrested on a frequent basis, as the sheriff can tell you. They're in possession of a firearm, and they're almost immediately back out on the streets. And we had an incident last year where that happened, and it evolved into a shooting in a crowded mall that resulted in a homicide. At least one, possibly two of those individuals had recently been in the system on a juvenile firearm-related offense. So we are thankful for the efforts in drafting this bill. We support it. It deals with a finite number of the population. It doesn't result in a philosophical shift on the way that we think we should handle juveniles as a whole, but it addresses a community safety issue, and we appreciate the sponsorship of this bill.
Thank you, Deputy District Attorney Paschal. If you'd stick around, we may have some questions for you.
Sure.
I'm showing written only proponent testimony from Captain Travis Rakestraw of the Wichita Police Department. I'm assuming he's not with us, is that right? He's not physically here or virtually by WebEx, is that right? Okay, good. Are there any other proponents? I believe, yes. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Crystal Hedrick, and I did submit testimony through the email. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today in support of 2325. My name is Crystal Hedrick. I serve as the CEO with the Children's Alliance of Kansas. The Alliance is an association of 18 private nonprofit child welfare agencies that collectively provide a full array of services for kids and families in terms of child welfare, child abuse and neglect prevention, family preservation, foster care, adoption, independent living, parent, youth, and child skill building, mental health, and substance abuse treatment. Juvenile justice reforms have really worked well for many juvenile offenders here in Kansas, and we have seen the positive results of that. However, we continue to experience a gap in serving youth who are repeat offenders and serious offenders. And while we've made improvements in the expansion of services and support available to youth in the last few years through the passage of HB 2021, this gap still exists. So you've heard a lot about data and scenarios today, and I'm going to continue to offer you some real-life scenarios that I've gathered from my members who are able to come up with these situations pretty quickly. So I'm going to share a couple of those with you today. One is regarding a youth that had several felony charges and had run from his foster home placement overnight. When he returned the next morning, he let some of his friends that were around him know that he had purchased a firearm and he had that on him. So he was in an office space with other youth in care, and another youth reported that they believed that he had a firearm on him. When officers arrived to question him about that, he got physical with them, and it eventually took several officers to tackle him to the ground and find that he did have a loaded firearm on him at the time. Another situation, two teen boys in foster care, ages 17 and 14, several ongoing repeat felony charges, struggling to maintain in foster homes, but they had one elderly single-parent foster home that was willing to support them, and she often took them in on birthdays and holidays and special occasions, and was actually in the process of planning a birthday party for one of the boys. But they had different plans for her. They planned to rob her at gunpoint and did so successfully, and she was able to contact law enforcement, and when they found them, they did find that they had a handgun and possession of a firearm. And when they were taken to JIAC, they were released back to that foster parent with just in just a couple of hours. And she felt really unsafe taking them back into her home following that. Thus, those two youth ended up in one of our foster care providers' offices overnight because other foster providers were worried for their safety and the safety of other children in their home. I could continue on with these stories for quite some time. I'll just share with you that prior to my work at the Alliance, I have been in child welfare for a couple of decades in leadership positions supporting social workers. So a couple of situations that I've encountered were asking my staff to do things that I myself wouldn't have wanted to do, to pick up youth who had firearms on them, who assaulted police officers, who were able to overcome other police officers and to take their weapons off of them. And within hours of that, social workers, young female social workers, are being asked to pick up these youth and to find placement for them with other children in foster care who are victims of abuse and neglect and in foster care to no fault of their own. Additionally, I'll share with you that I was a foster parent in Kansas for several years, and my family took in youth who were in foster care to no fault of their own, and they had angry behaviors. I remember taking in a youth who was 15 and was nervous about being away from his family and angry about being in foster care. And when DCF and law enforcement were at his home to remove him from that space, he threw a pocket knife at a tree that was nearby the social worker. My workers said, "Oh, you sure you want to take this kid?" And we did. And I may have slept with an eye open overnight, but we were safe because our foster caregivers are trained to support a 15-year-old boy who's angry and afraid to be away from his family and with strange people that he doesn't know. But there's a difference between those 15-year-olds and 15-year-olds who are purchasing handguns and actively and repeatedly harming those around them in aggressive ways. So our workforce and our caregivers are trained to support kids who have experienced traumas, but they are not equipped to deal with youth who are committing these felony-level crimes against people repeatedly. So the Children's Alliance would ask for your support in HB 2325 and believe that this is an additional tool to support families and professionals caring for kids in unsafe situations. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. I see we did have written support from District Attorney Mark Bennett. Not sure if he is on WebEx. Oh, okay.
I'm appearing on Mr. Bennett's behalf.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe we have a proponent here, Mr. Love. Would you like to speak to the committee on this bill?
Chair and members, thanks for having me. Bill, I thank you for reaching out to me. I think you know my heart for Kansas and for our youth. I've been blessed to serve these youth for the last 24 years. The last 16, I've been a residential director of 5 residential facilities. Within that time, I echo the same concerns as Children's Alliance in regards to how we need to address our youth. We've made it an unsafe space in Kansas because we have not created any accountability for these young people. They've been able to commit crimes beyond the weapons, and so when we're not being proactive, now we're reactive, and then we have people that are dying, people that are being raped, and so we wait for them to commit a felony, and then we're trying to put all the pieces together. And I just recommend that we continue to push this 2325 bill, but we need to put a space, create a space for a therapeutic, secure facility for these youth. Not 3 hots and a cot, but I'm talking about therapeutic, where we want to bring change, where we want to bring some resolve to make them productive in the community. So then we're not talking about them being approved as adults getting, not being able to find employment, but as adults. But let's be proactive and help them as their youth, so we're not continuing to repeat the same cycle of poverty, incarceration, and premature death. Let's just break this cycle by providing a secure facility, not just making them a juvenile offender, detaining them, putting them in a juvenile detention facility, but let's put them in a therapeutic secure facility where we can get to the source of the problem and provide them with the best care that they need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just for the record, that was Lovett Love. Is that the right name? Lamont. I apologize. Lamont Love. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak to the bill? Seeing none, open up for questions from the committee. Representative Smith.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Anybody that has talked, handguns are expensive. How do these kids get their hands on them? How hard is it to get their hands on them? So, anybody?
Yeah, Representative, this is Jeff Easter with KSA. Multiple ways, committing burglaries, committing car thefts where people leave their guns in their car, buying them on the streets is generally how juveniles come in contact with weapons that they possess.
Thank you.
Representative Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question, first I have a question for Angela, because you mentioned a couple of things. My first question for you is, you mentioned a bunch of stories. Do you have a percentage of how many youth offenders, because you're doing individual stories, do you have a percentage of people who would fall underneath this bill?
Thank you for the question. I don't have that data right now, but I could get with my members and put some together.
All right, that would be awesome. And then my question.
Just a minute.
Sorry.
Yeah, that would be helpful if you could send that to me and I'll distribute it to the committee.
Thank you very much. And then I know that was mentioned that we want to create a therapeutic experience for these youth offenders. Does such therapeutic, does it already exist? Is this something that already exists? Or so right now we're gonna house the children, but we're not, the therapeutic environment doesn't exist. And then I have one final question. This might be for the reviser, not registrar. Can we define what possession is? So if someone commits a crime and they get into a car and that car happens to have a gun in it that might not be from that youth and that gun was not used in commission of that crime, would that be considered a possession charge under this law? Or could it be interpreted as such under this law?
Representative, this is Steve Howe, Johnson County District Attorney. What I will tell you is possession is defined pretty clearly in state statute and our pattern instructions for Kansas. Possession doesn't mean that it actually has to be physically on your person. It just has to be under your control. And so, if I stick a firearm under my seat, I can still be charged with possession of a firearm because I have control over it. And it's very fact driven. You can't, sometimes you can have multiple people have possession of but if you have a group of 5 kids in a car, you cannot in good stead file 5 counts of possession of a firearm. It has to be who's actually taking assertive steps or taking affirmative steps to actually possess that firearm at some point in time.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one final question and I will stop talking. So in this case, we're going to incarcerate children regardless of risk factor. So will these children who have access to, that we're holding accountable and not considering confounding issues in their lives, for these children that are being held accountable, are they going to be segregated, or are they going to be with kids who are at a higher risk factor because of the gun possession charge that they're now getting? Let's just say a quiet little nerd happened to do a crime and they are 90 pounds soaking wet and they were in the band yesterday and now they're finding themselves in jail or prison. Will they be housed with hardened criminal children, or will they be housed in a segregated space where they get access to the therapeutic services that are yet to exist in this state?
I'm thinking Sheriff Easter might be the best proponent to answer that.
I don't have an answer for that. I don't run juvenile detention facilities, so I don't know what that would look like.
Are there any other?
I might be able to answer a little bit. It depends on the jurisdiction and what kind of facility they have. So the answer to your question is, in some instances, yeah, they may be mixed in with higher risk people if it's a smaller jurisdiction that doesn't have different pods that you could place individuals. I know in our jurisdiction, because we're one of the larger jurisdictions, they do screen people and have them placed depending on the severity level of the crime and other factor screening tools. So the answer to your question is depends.
Right.
Yes, I believe if you could state your name.
My name is Steve Stonehouse. I'm the director of Sedgwick County Department of Corrections.
Yes.
And we operate a 108-bed juvenile detention facility. So when a juvenile offender is brought in for orientation, so the scenario the representative is speaking of, they go to an orientation pod. Most children in that area, as the district attorney said, have not been charged with a crime yet. So they are waiting for a determination by the district attorney if a crime is going to be charged. There's typically 24 to 48 hours, and then he or she is either charged or then they're released. That's the typical fashion in Sedgwick County of what happens.
But they have been arrested.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And in Sedgwick County, if somebody's arrested with a handgun, we automatically apply an override, and they stay until the district attorney can look at the facts in the morning.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Howerton, do you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Love. Yeah, you can come on up. So I heard you speak before, and I love the part about the accountability. And could you tell us like some of your success stories too, where you've worked one-on-one with?
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to address, I know you were looking for stats in regards to what she was addressing. I'll tell you within a year, within 12 months, I've confiscated 12 guns. In 12 months. My staff, they're not feeling safe. The young men that are trying to work the program aren't feeling safe. And the police, all they can do is what they can do. But their hands are tied when these bills are not helping them to fulfill their duty to protect and serve. So here these youth are. The police come and say, "Where did you get that gun from, young man?" He says, "I don't know." The police takes the gun. The young man's still in the home. The other young men see that he's still in the home, and then what do they feel? They feel unsafe. And the whole reason we took them out of their homes because they were unsafe. So then what are we doing? So, and then in regards to, we have the same kids that are stealing these guns are stealing cars. No accountability there. Had a kid steal 5 cars within a month's time, multiple guns, no accountability, none at all. And so then we're making everybody's on pins and needles, feeling unsafe, keeping a gun on their arm at all times. Why? But we've been blessed to serve some great kids. They've done well. At Life Inc., we have some young men that have graduated, went on to vocational school. Not all of them ideally go to a 4-year college, and that's okay. But at least they find some value in hard work. Matter of fact, I have a young man, I'll be in his wedding this August. Mom was on drugs, dad in and out of jail, and now he's getting married, has a full-time job, and has a part-time lawn business in the summer. And in my mind, when we first started serving these youth, hey, I thought we were going to save everyone. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality. But we're not helping them by being reactive instead of being proactive, by not holding them accountable to the small actions that they're displaying, opposed to, oh, now let's go ahead and detain you because you've killed someone, because you've raped someone. No, let's address them when they're breaking into these stores and when they're physically assaulting staff that are caring for them. Let's hold them accountable then.
Mr. Love, if you could just give us a little more background on your operation, what you're doing. I don't think that's been explained sufficiently.
Okay. So for the last 16 years, I've been blessed to serve the children in foster care in the residential facilities. We strive to provide a home environment for them. We've been blessed to help majority of them all graduate from high school. We serve youth from 13 to 18, and then they may transition into an independent living program or a TLP, or they'll just, transition out of the system completely and go off on their own, and they seem to have done well. But the struggle is police can't police, teachers can't teach, guardians can't guard, judges can't judge because there's no accountability in place, and then that's why I'm pushing the conversation of a therapeutic secure facility. Missouri has a proven model, and it's been shown to be successful, where they're helping youth getting to the roots of the problem, getting the ground level in a small environment, not being 3 hots in a cot, not being physically aggressive. And I've been blessed to work at JDF, and they do a great job as well. But I'm just talking about, let's get to the root of the problem and make them feel like, let them know that they're loved. Most people that are angry and mad, the opposite of hate is love. So let's let them know that they're loved, let them know that we care, but we're not going to justify their choices.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Martinez.
I don't know where to begin. I'm a little, okay, so this piece of legislation is to commit juvenile offenders to detention for technical violations of probation and increase penalties for those who use a firearm, okay, 2 separate things. I've worked with youth for the past 30 years. I've worked direct care with residential youth in the residential youth facilities and direct care. I know the violence that these kids can bring about. And I know that no matter how trained we are as workers, you can't handle the kids that have these very violent behaviors. I've seen a kid get his face kicked in because he had mental issues. The other resident had bad behaviors. They've broken TVs, they've broken into cars, they've slammed a social worker's head into the concrete porch, and then proceeded to go over to another worker's car and bust out her windows. So I found even myself walking on my tippy toes with these residents. You can't tell them nothing. They refuse therapy. They refuse to go to when they're found placements, somebody that will take them in. They come in and they do what they want. Now, that being said, you have those who refuse their therapies and things like that, services, who refuse placements, and they have violent behaviors. You have those who have violent behaviors because they're not medicated properly. I've seen them come in under-medicated, over-medicated, not medicated. Their medical charts are crazy. So when just the part where they're committing juvenile offenders to detention for technical violations, are they going to be housed at the same time? I mean, with these kids that are just have really bad behaviors? Because I've seen that, and it's dangerous for those that do have mental health issues. So, and that was in a particular day program. So, I walked in, and one of them was kicking the kid's face in. So, I agree with Mr. Love that we need a secure facility for sure, and therapeutic for sure, because behaviors need to be addressed. Locking them up isn't going to work. So, what is there a plan for, what's the plan once they go into, once they're incarcerated? What's the plan there? I know they have a risk assessment. I don't even know who this goes to, so anybody can jump in and address. But the risk assessment, what does that entail? And is it the same for those with mental health issues as it is for those with just, who have a gun, who have got caught with a gun? Also, speaking of a gun, one of the kids got picked up, ran, committed some crimes along the way. He had a knife that we couldn't get from him before he ran, and they brought him right back with it. And we were like, why didn't you ask WPD, why didn't you take it away? He said, because it's his property. So they gave it back to us, and then he wanted it, and he was going to fight the worker for it. So, you know, what are we doing once they're incarcerated? What are we doing with them? Because locking them up is just not the answer. There has to be, you know, yes, they need a secure facility. I agree. I completely agree with that. But what's the plan? What would the plan be once you commit these juvenile offenders to detention for technical violations, because they're probably not going to their therapy. They're probably
Not going to school.
not going to school. That's a big one, yes, because they refuse school. There's so many that just don't go to school.
Causing thousands of dollars in property damage.
Yes,
Continue
yes.
to
That's
run
right.
away
That's
multiple
right.
times on end.
That's right. So when you commit them to detention, what's the plan? What's the plan for them after that? In those 30 days or 90 days or whatever it is that they're being
I mean, after the
detained for.
assessment and after they've met the goals of progress, transition them back into the community. They can appreciate, then once they've shown progress and they've shown they can appreciate what the community is offering them, let them transition back in the community, whether that's a foster care home. Based off the assessment, maybe they need to go into transition to a group home. Or maybe
Most kids can go in and spend 30 days like that. They don't care.
And that's why, so I don't think they should be released until they've met those certain progress goals. I don't think it should be based off of a time. I think it should be based off their progress.
So while they're in there, though, are they going to receive services?
Yes, therapeutic services.
And this is what this bill is that in here?
No. You know, I feel compelled to chime in when I heard Children's Alliance discussing the issues that we deal with kids. And we have KVC here as well, and we're all dealing with the same issues, right? We love these kids that we've been blessed to serve, but we're calling them child in need of care, but they're also, a lot of them are juvenile offenders.
Right.
But they're just not being held accountable as juvenile offenders.
And they know you won't hold them accountable.
Right.
They'll tell you, what are you going to do?
And so we can only do so much. So then I propose that we keep them in that space, a safe space for them and for society until they understand what they need to do.
And if you want maybe an example of numbers, I've worked for 13 years in the field, and I'll just kind of talk about my last maybe 6 months before I came into the legislature. I worked with probably about 20 kids, 30 kids, and they were all very violent, and they would go off at the drop of the hat. So they were very violent, very hard. Of course, it was the last stop for them. No one would take them. You couldn't house them. They went somewhere at night. They came to us during the day, and they marched right on through the door and did their thing, and nobody could control them. So there's that population that I think that we're talking about that's uncontrollable. And they know that you can't do anything to them.
So I think there were at least one, if not more, in the audience that thought they could add something to the discussion. I think about the therapies that might be available to the detained juveniles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I wanted to answer the question that you were asking. My name's Megan Milner. I'm a Deputy Secretary with the Kansas Department of Corrections. Also, prior to being in this role, I was the superintendent at the Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex, which is our state's juvenile correctional facility. So if you have questions about the experiences youth might have in the correctional facility, I'm happy to answer them. In this particular scenario that you describe, Representative, if a youth is detained in detention for a technical violation, they are going to most likely be housed in the same housing unit with the other youth. The majority of detention centers that we have across the state do not separate them out by maybe awaiting a court hearing or something along those lines. I would also add that the majority of juvenile detention centers in the state do not provide therapeutic services. With the passage of House Bill 2021, the legislature did ask that the Department of Corrections start funding access to behavioral health and substance abuse services in juvenile detention centers. That's the first time that has ever happened and the first time that's ever been a requirement in juvenile detention centers across the state. So the majority of juvenile detention centers are not providing therapeutic or rehabilitative services. It is risk containment, meaning to house them while they're awaiting a court hearing.
If I might add, you mentioned House Bill 2221. That was passed, what, last year?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, that was passed in 2023. Is that correct? Yes, thank you.
So that's requiring that the detention centers then start to provide this information or this help.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that bill requires that juvenile detention centers assess youth who come in for risk and need and then develop a case plan and then provide at least some kind of referral point to mental health and substance abuse services specifically.
Those are the ones that are in the detention facilities as opposed to the correctional facility.
The correctional facility has a pretty robust array of programming and services that are available there. The majority of juvenile detention centers do not have that.
But they will get them pursuant to 2221, is that?
They are currently receiving funding to refer youth. Most of them are contracting maybe with a local mental health provider. Some of them have hired their own mental health or substance abuse staff to work in the facility.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
One more question.
We're going to, I'll come back to you, but I think there were two other, the lady right there wanted to speak to the issue.
Hi, my name is Angela Hedrick, Vice President of Operations for KVC. We're contracted with DCF to provide foster care in catchment areas 3 and 6. So that's Johnson, Douglas, Shawnee, and then several rural counties in the surrounding area. And I would just add that I think some of what you're asking about is bleeding over into 2329, which we're going to discuss next, and some of what I plan to address in my testimony. But I think, and then Ms. Milner was able to address some of what is currently provided through juvenile detention centers. But for 2325, if additional time in incarceration occurs because of the level of offense, what it would allow for is some increased safety and time for the current care providers, whether it's a day services program or a residential provider or a foster parent or the case management provider in foster care, to respond, allow the youth to have some accountability for the actions they have taken, and then we would develop a time. If it's a 30-day detention, we would develop a plan for reintegrating them back into, stepping them down to a residential facility. When we move over to talk about 2329, what we're talking about is the Department of Corrections utilizing funding from the Department of Corrections to have additional non-foster care options for placement of those youth, for residential placement that could provide therapeutic services, for potentially non-foster care home environments. Prior to Senate Bill 367, there were foster homes through Department of Corrections, and placement options outside of the traditional foster care system. So having funding for those placement options would allow more structure for youth who are experiencing these behaviors, additional treatment options, some separation from the youth who are maybe more vulnerable, who have experienced abuse or neglect, or maybe vulnerable for other reasons. So it would provide increased safety, and it would just overall be a more effective service delivery model for meeting the needs of the juvenile offender population and meeting the needs of the population of youth who have been abused and neglected. And my testimony for 2329 will go into that a little bit more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The lady, right, did you want to speak to that issue? No? You're good? Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to, well, I'm not going to turn it over to you, but I'll allow Representative Carmichael to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your indulgence. I'll try to be quick. As I'm sure the chair has noted, the fiscal note, it provides that the Department of Corrections, if we pass this bill, is going to have to reopen at least 3 15-bed housing units at the Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex. It's going to have to add 28.5 full-time equivalent positions. They estimate the total cost of this legislation as in excess of $5 million over the next 2 years. So my question to Mr. Stevens, as well as Mr. Stevens of St. Francis, as well as his colleagues from KVC and the other providers I see in the room, wouldn't you agree that if we pass this legislation that we ought to let our colleagues in appropriations know to reduce the appropriations for your agencies by $5 million because you will no longer be responsible to take care of these children? Would you agree, Mr. Stevens?
So, Representative Carmichael, I definitely appreciate the question. And so the way that our contracts actually work is really kind of on a by-case basis. And so as those children exit our care and then are diverted back somewhere else, and naturally our those payment methodologies would go down with that. It's a more of a case rate and by case than kind of what.
Yeah, and I phrased
just a blanket 5 million, stop right away.
Yeah, I phrased it wrong. We just need to divert those funds that used to go to you all. We need to send it over to KODC so they can take care of these kids that you're not going to be taking care of. Agreed?
I agree that the payment methodology that we're currently operating under pays us by kids, and the less kids that we have in care, the less that we get. And so I would agree with that.
I appreciate the circumstance. We do have to try to keep things revenue neutral as best we can, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's see. I think Representative Martinez wanted to ask another question. You're fine? Okay, good. Representative Mosley.
This question is for Mr. Lovett, or is it Love? Yeah, so we are going to be locking children up in hopes that one day we'll have therapeutic services because it's funded, maybe. My question for you is, have you been working with have you been advocating for these therapeutic services? Have you been working with anyone to get legislation like that passed so that things go together? Because my biggest worry is that we're going to lock up kids. This first batch of kids will not have access to those services. So what is being done with like your organization or any of the organizations to help advocate for these services?
I've written a business plan called ICK, Individualized Care of Kansas, which is a therapeutic secure facility that I'm proposing to provide for Kansas. Once again, I was blessed to be in the room with Bill a couple weeks ago, this young lady here, and we were able to create some conversation, so I'm taking the steps. Is the funding there? No, it's not. But I know the funding is there. We just have to make sure that we're allocating the funds the way they need to, like Mr. Carmichael is saying.
So you're hoping to be able to provide some of these services?
I would love to.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Neely.
I just wanted to let everybody know that the bill that we were looking for earlier, that the Secretary of Corrections would provide certain services to juveniles in detention centers is HB 2021, not 221, because we already have that one in our committee, and I didn't want people to get confused on it.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it very much. Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for the person that runs the detention centers. Where are they at? There you go. The money that you currently have, could you take this on without an increase in money?
Steve Stonehouse from the Sedgwick County Department of Corrections. We're funded by the county. So
Now, our county, I'll just give you an estimate. We pay $60,000 a year. We had 4 housed, so we used 3,000 of that. So they kept the other $57,000. So, I mean, do you have the money to take on these additional people if this was to pass?
we would probably have to talk to the Board of County Commissioners for funding if our average daily population increased.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Seeing no further requests to ask questions, okay, one more.
I'm sorry. And this, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Megan Milner.
Megan Milner, thank you. You said something about possibly trying to utilize some of those funds which were allocated with 2021 for the Department of Corrections to provide some type of programming or therapeutic services. Did you say that?
Mr. Chairman, sort of. So House Bill 2021 requires that the Secretary of Corrections ensure that services are delivered in the juvenile detention centers, and we're currently using funding from the evidence-based programs account to do that. That's where that funding is coming from.
What kind of services do they have in the juvenile detention
I'm going to have
facility?
to cut it off. We need to get on to the next item of business, so we're going to close. There's an opponent who's on WebEx, I believe, Ms. Bors?
Yes, I'm
Laura Blake Bors, yeah.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank
Okay.
you, and welcome to committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. My name is Laura Blake Bors, and I'm a defense attorney, and I am the Legislative Subcommittee Chair for the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, or JJOC. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify today. And I apologize. Are we on 2325 or 2329? I thought we were 2325.
25.
25, thank you. One of the comments that was made by one of the representatives in the questions earlier, and I appreciated the comment about the quiet little nerd who was 90 pounds soaking wet and being stuck in detention with everyone else. One thing that I wanted to mention was discretion that's currently in the law as it is, versus the shall language that is being proposed in the bill right now. With the firearm language that's being suggested, the shall takes away that discretion. And as Mr. Stonehouse mentioned, there is that override language, and they are leaving people who are in possession of a firearm in overnight while they wait for the district attorney to review the charges before they release someone who is in possession of a firearm. One thing that I want you to possibly think about is the Juvenile Justice Code. If you are looking at someone who is could potentially be charged, it's anyone from the age of 10 to 17. So think about someone who is possibly being arrested at the age of 10 with a firearm. Do you want that person to automatically be detained and in a detention center with someone who is 16 or 17 automatically with no discretion from the judge to be able to release that person based upon the facts after they have reviewed them. If you have a shall in the statute, the judge loses all discretion. But if you allow them to be able to review it at a detention hearing, the judge then has discretion. So I do want you to have that, take that into some consideration. I'm a big proponent in allowing the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney to be able to have some discretion when they are the ones who have the boots on the ground with looking at the facts of the case, looking at the juvenile before them, and all of the factors going on. But the JJOC is committed to is committed to data-driven, evidence-based policies that increase public safety and holding youth accountable. As you've heard today, that's something that everyone wants to do, is holding youth accountable. And we acknowledge that there are valid concerns in the years passing since Senate Bill 367, and challenges in the system need to be addressed. However, any legislative efforts must be data-driven and evidence-based. And we are concerned that any legislative efforts with regard to this need to be looked at very carefully. Currently, the accepted research concludes that there is no strong relation between the length of incarceration and the future rate of arrest, or that longer time spent incarcerated means lower recidivism or a deterrent for youth to commit crimes. JJOC has seen no research or data to give reason to deviate from the sentencing grid. Felony case filings across the state has actually continued to trend downward without the need to increase incarceration times, as you can find in our 2024 JJOC annual report. We appreciate the grave concern that is had when young people are in possession and using firearms, especially when paired with the commission of a felony. However, possession of a firearm while a juvenile is only a misdemeanor offense, we question the rationale behind enhancing the punishment in those situations, a situation where a felony must already exist. Also, the previous work group believed that detention should be an option in the most serious of situations for the highest risk youth. The risk is determined by the use of the risk needs assessment. And in this bill, under the category of chronic offenders, it creates the ability to admit a juvenile to JCF without a risk needs assessment, opening up the possibility of admitting a youth to JCF that otherwise could be considered low risk. As we have stated in previous testimony and presentations, research tells us that sending low risk youth deeper into the system more than likely increases the likelihood of increasing the chances of reoffending and decreasing the chance of success. Essentially, you're going to be teaching the low-risk youth how to be high-risk youth. The JJOC recommends that Kansas follows the evidence, data, and research that guides the use of detention. In the same thought process, JJOC is concerned about using detention to address technical violations of probation. In the current language of the bill, a juvenile who once fails to report for an office visit could be placed in detention. While in most jurisdictions that is not the practice, the proposed language would allow for it. JJOC has a vested interest in the appropriate care for youth in the juvenile justice system and feels that it needs more guidance and guardrails. Giving this open door option could have unintended consequences for the youth of Kansas, and would recommend that this only be done in the most serious offenses for high-risk youth. So after that conversation of these concerns in this topic continue, but that changes to current laws happen after a more statewide evaluation be conducted. So right now we're in opposition of the bill, but we would like additional conversations with regard to these topics. And I'd like to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bors. Any questions? I believe that's the only opponent at the moment. Oh, okay.
There are several opponents.
Oh, that's what I'm asking. I don't have them on my list, but you're welcome to address. I just point out that we gave notice late last week that we were going to have these hearings on Thursday, and because of the snow day, they were put over. So
Submitted testimony to this committee that was supposed to have been on the S drive, where legislators like I look for the testimony to prepare for this hearing, was not present and is still not present. I'm being bushwhacked, and I think the people of the state of Kansas are. No matter whose fault it is, this is wrong.
I respectfully disagree. My office assistant has put everything that she's received on the S drive.
There is information that I've just been shown that is on the bill webpage that is not on the S drive. So I don't know where the testimony is being hidden, but we don't have access to it, Mr. Chair, and that is unfair to everyone who takes their time here. It's unfair to the committee. It's unfair to the children of Kansas.
I think you're overreacting. We have had problems with the S drive, but it's something that we're working on, as you know, in other committees too. We've had the same problem. It's not unique to this committee.
I'm not going to take any more of the committee's time. We'll have a discussion offline. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm Megan Milner, Deputy Secretary with the Kansas Department of Corrections. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony today. The Kansas Department of Corrections is in opposition of House Bill 2325. And I will try to go quickly because really I'm going to echo some of what has been said. Senate Bill 367 really signaled an opportunity in Kansas to align ourselves with evidence-based practices and to be data-driven in the juvenile justice system, and that is really our focus. One of the concerns with House Bill 2325 is the lack of data that we have available to us about the level of need. I am absolutely not minimizing the stories that we have heard here today, some of them very awful and very tragic. But what I have not heard and what I do not feel has been presented in testimony is something that reflects the level of need for these changes across the broader state, as well as evidence that points to the changes in the bill being the correct solution for some of our challenges. We do know research is very consistent that confinement and detention should only be used for kids who are highest risk and who pose the most risk to public safety. Confinement can disrupt whatever pro-social or good things kids do have going on. It takes them out of school. It takes them away from home. It takes them away from any services that they could be involved in, like substance abuse or mental health services. And it disrupts them when we pick them up and take them out of the community and we put them in a detention center, which is why research very consistently says we should be reserving those placements for the youth who pose the most risk to public safety. House Bill 2023 proposes to expand detention to technical violations. Just so you are aware, some of the technical violations we've seen before include maybe not paying community service hours, not maintaining a certain grade point average at school, or maybe not showing up for school. I want to clarify that with the language in this bill, that would allow a court to detain a youth for those reasons in Kansas. Likewise, placement in a juvenile correctional facility should also be reserved for those youth who are highest risk. House Bill 2325 would expand the sentencing matrix. That would allow youth with non-person offenses to be sent to the juvenile correctional facility, even if they are low or moderate risk. It doesn't require that they are high risk. And I want to just explain very quickly, when a youth is low risk, That means they have certain protective factors that exist in their life that make it more likely that they will discontinue any criminal behavior. And so when we then put them into a correctional facility with high-risk youth, it is a perfect example of social learning theory and how they learn behaviors from the other youth that are there. This absolutely contradicts the evidence that we have in the field of juvenile justice regarding what works for this population. So for these reasons, the Kansas Department of Corrections is opposed to House Bill 2325, and I'm happy to stand for questions whenever you would like for me to.
Just a minute. How many more opponents do we have in the audience? One, I'm counting. Is that it? One more? Okay, we'll take that opponent and then come back to questions. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Fonkert. I'm the Deputy Director with Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and I will also keep my comments as brief as possible. Today, I want to urge the committee to deeply consider changes to the youth justice system. The 2016 reform, Senate Bill 367, as we all know it, is the product of multiple years of study, of the data, scores of stakeholders collaborated on that, and a legislature much comprised of a similar makeup as that today, nearly unanimously passed that change. That legislation was championed by Senator Greg Smith, John Rubin in the House, Blaine Finch, folks that you all probably likely know, very conservative individuals. This was not some archaic law. This is a modern reform that was the result of deep, deep deliberation. And we should give any change to that law, particularly what's proposed in the two bills considered today, that would undo a lot of that work, the equal consideration that was given to making these initial changes. The testimony from proponents today is a perfect example as to why this particular issue needs more study. Not one proponent mentioned the increase from 45 to 90 days of the cumulative detention limit. What basis is there for that? The proponents showed up and they didn't even talk about it. Why do penalties need to be doubled for firearm-related crimes? I'm not going to argue that possession of a firearm versus commission of a firearm. This is a child that's obviously engaged in some dangerous behavior. I think Representative Mosley's questions about what defines possession are another great example of why this needs to be studied more. Talked about why we needed to double the minimum sentence for firearm-related crimes or the maximum sentence. Regarding the override, that was highlighted by Ms. Bors. The authority to override the detention risk assessment is already in the hands of judges across this state. They have wide leeway to override that detention assessment and incarcerate a child for many, many reasons. I think if they are not using that authority with firearm-related crimes, that warrants conversation, collaboration, and study as to why some jurisdictions, Mr. Stonehouse indicated that Sedgwick County does have an override in place for those crimes. If other jurisdictions don't, we need to understand why, rather than mandating as the state that we supersede local jurisdictions and their control of their courthouses. With regards to technical violations, if we are to improve Senate Bill 367, we actually should be excluding technical violations from detention use. This legislation proposes to include them. In 2023, when we passed House Bill 2021, the legislature saw fit to add language that said a judge would have to make a finding that the child's demonstrating an escalating use of aggressive behavior or violence or use of life-threatening substance, and that was a wise guardrail to put in place. No technical violation would ever meet that standard. So why don't we just exclude them altogether? I would recommend one of the committee members make that amendment to this legislation. And the issue really goes beyond that. District Attorney Howe said, well, you know, we wouldn't put a kid in jail for the first technical violation. That wouldn't make sense. But this legislation would allow that. So we should use a very, very precise pen as we draft legislation like this. If we're not going to put kids in jail for their first technical violation, we should enumerate that in law. We should make sure that that's uniformly applied, because as it stands today, one technical violation and the kid could go to jail. Some jurisdictions, yes. Some jurisdictions, no. That doesn't seem like equitable justice. It comes as no surprise that the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee and the Department of Corrections are here today opposing this legislation, because it needs more collaboration. It needs more thought. I commend the bringer of this legislation and this committee for considering these changes, because I'm also always so heartened to hear everyone agree that for 90+% of kids, Senate Bill 367 is working good. We need to be very, very specific about what changes we make to address that. Again, I think this legislation, really the only thing that makes potential sense is that possession of a firearm. But escalating the time a kid would go to jail, we could put a 10-year-old in jail for 36 months for possessing a firearm, or anyone else. 36 months in the life of a child is an eternity. What data drives the decision to include in this legislation doubling that sentence? So that's what I would encourage you all to consider. My colleague also submitted written testimony that I'm sure you can see online. There are just scores of citations about why harsh punishments don't always work, and why we need to be very, very targeted with what we do with our young people. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Representative Howerton, I believe you had a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. And it's maybe not a question, maybe more an observation. When I look at committee and I look at testimony, I always like to see if there's a divide. And there is a divide in this testimony. Proponents are the boots on the ground people dealing with children. Opponents is an agency, an oversight committee, and an activist. And so it is telling. The problem I think we're trying to solve is what happens in that in-between time when they get caught with a gun. What do we do with that? Right now, they're going to foster care, and that is not an answer. That is not an answer. And so we are trying to bring an answer to solve this problem. I do not see an answer from the Deputy Secretary, who is sitting on millions of dollars that is supposed to be used for therapeutic or for justice-involved children. And they've had that for several years. So I'm a little frustrated. I'm from child welfare. I'm chair of child welfare, so that's where my heart is. And I don't know, I don't really know what to do with this testimony, but it's up to y'all as a committee. So I just wanted to say that because I'm off of here after today, so maybe.
Thank you. Representative Smith, did you have a question? Yes,
please. Thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, a 10-year-old with a gun, I think, is a highest risk. But I also feel like putting that 10-year-old with a 16-year-old is a highest risk also, because they only get worse. Things only get worse. So I think there is a great divide as well. And I don't think the word shall. I think the judge has the authority. Let the judge make that. So highest risk, yeah, you got a gun. You're pretty high risk.
That's dangerous, absolutely.
That's dangerous. And but like you say, I kind of go along there. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I address what Representative Howerton just asked or commented on?
You may.
The Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee is made up of people who are boots on the ground. I mean, I'm a juvenile.
Well, stop. For everybody, we need you to announce again who you are.
Sorry.
Ms.
This is Laura Blake Bors, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Representative Howard, the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee is made up of people who are boots on the ground. I was appointed by the Chief Justice as the Juvenile Defense Attorney Representative. I represent juveniles on a daily basis. I've been involved in child welfare myself for over 20 years. I was a juvenile prosecutor for over 9 years. I've been a juvenile defense attorney for almost 15 years, and I've served in every different role in child in need of care cases as well. We have individuals on dealing with the Department of Corrections. We've got people on child welfare as well. We're not just some individuals sitting in an ivory tower trying to come up with different policies. We are individuals who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. We have an assistant district attorney who deals with child welfare as well. We are divided on this issue. However, we want data on this. I agree with a lot of what the people said on the proponent side as well, comments that they made, and that things need to be fixed with issues on here too. But I also believe that additional research needs to be done with these topics, and we need to go at it a little bit differently and with a finer tooth comb than what we have in this specific bill, which is why the JJOC is specifically opposing it. And I do believe in discretion. Now, I gave you an extreme hypothetical. I can give you a lot of different variations with regard to that, but I was trying to prove a point with regard to why we needed discretion. So, thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any further questions?
I just want to say that Mike is not just an activist, he's an advocate, and that's something that's very different. He does this on a professional setting, and no offense to the activist, but the way that it was said seems slightly disrespectful to someone who does this as a full-time job.
Thank you. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this could be for Appleseed, if that works too. So, and I can see your point, possibly on the technical violations, but for example, on the gun crimes. So, I mean, I would say the data is here locally in Topeka, the prosecutors are in Wichita and Sedgwick County. They're seeing gang-affiliated kids who are getting shootings, shooting other kids, shooting other adults. We have law enforcement saying it's just not working the way it is. So where do you believe, from your perspective, the disconnect is when it comes to the judge has discretion, well, law enforcement, prosecutors, the group homes are saying that, well, we have kids in our group homes that have guns, law enforcement saying, hey, we're putting him in, he gets right out. So where's the disconnect? I guess that's my question.
It's a great question, and I appreciate that. Again, Mike Fonkert, Kansas Appleseed. I think that's the conversation that needs to happen locally. If judges have this discretion to override and detain kids, but they're not, let's talk to them. Why is that happening? I don't understand. Some jurisdictions have that in place, some don't. Like I said, I think the most targeted thing that we might be able to really all agree on is that kids with guns is bad. That's a bad situation. That is a child that is involved in dangerous activity, and an intervention of a serious nature is needed for that child. But everything else in this bill should be cut away, and we should give, potentially, if some more thorough discussion is given to this, the authority to change that. I think Sheriff Easter's point was great. The difference between possession and then using a gun is seconds, right? And so if kids are walking around with guns, sure, we can be serious on them, but where is the evidence to say that we need to double the minimum time that they would be incarcerated for that, or that we should remove judges' discretion to sentence them to an alternative placement if the facts so chose? So I think that's really the matter is it's a local discussion that needs to be had, and if people If law enforcement's not happy with the decisions that their local judges are making, they need to have that conversation. If the local foster care providers are seeing too many kids with weapons that are getting kicked back to them over and over, that community needs to obviously have a conversation. I don't think it's the state, on the state to mandate some change that's going to really solve the problem. That's clearly a local issue. So.
Representative Carmichael, did you have a question?
I do, but I think Representative Howerton was seeking recognition. Perhaps I well, you were right she was right in the middle of the discussion, and we went away, and I just want to make sure we give her opportunity before I raise something different.
I did not mean that derogatory. The word advocate did not come to my mind. And my only other response to what was said to me was, we've been talking about this for 3 years, and I have yet to see a proposal from the opponents to make a solution for this. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you. My apologies to Representative Howerton, but we have been talking about this for far longer than I've been on this committee, which is 8 years. And in fact, we were talking about this when I came to the legislature 12 years ago. Mr. Fonkert has been a source of very valuable information. So quite frankly, I took some offense. I'm glad that the representative modified her remarks. That being said, Mr. Fonkert, I'm sorry, at a great disadvantage. I didn't have your testimony until literally 20 minutes or less before we walked into the room because...
Representative Carmichael, would you just get to the question?
Well, certainly, I'd be more than happy to, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fonkert, you've worked in this field for many, many years. Is there any reliable evidence that doubling, tripling incarceration time for juveniles creates better citizens when they grow up?
Not that I'm aware of. Actually, the evidence would point to the contrary. The longer that kids are incarcerated, typically the worse results they have.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to close with opponents. There's neutral from Kevin Waring, Chief Court Service Officer. Is Mr. Waring with us today, either in person or virtually? Just written. Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 2325. We're obviously not going to be able to have a hearing on 2329 as proposed, but I do have this request. All of those in the audience who were planning to speak to that, how many of you can be available either by WebEx or in person on Monday? So, or maybe I'll put it otherwise. Who among you who wanted to speak to the bill could not be available on Monday? Looks like, and anybody on WebEx? Ms. Bors, I understand you wanted to speak to that, the next one. Are you available Monday?
I will try to make myself available. Thank you.
We appreciate that. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
She could also probably find one of her colleagues if she's not available.
Sure. And also, we'll try to make sure that all the members of the committee have the written testimony. All right, with that, we'll adjourn for the day. Thank you for your input.